A very warm welcome to Keynote Session 4, being chaired by Professor Ravi Puvaya. Professor Ravi Puvaya is Emeritus Fellow and a Senior Faculty Member at IDC School of Design, IIT Bombay. His research interests are in areas related to visual language, information visualization, visual narratives, interaction devices, environment, and design play and learn environments for children. He has backgrounds in mechanical engineering from IIT Madras, product design and graphic design from IIT Bombay, and Rhode Island School of Design, RISD, Providence, USA. He is involved with building open access digital resource related to design learning and thinking to be introduced in schools from 6th to 12th grade. Professor Puvaya has worked on projects with major industry leaders such as Microsoft, Yahoo, Google India, Motorola India, IOC, BPCL, BEL, Siemens India, among others. We welcome you, sir. We request all the participants to ask their questions to the chat section. Thank you, and over to you, sir.
Thanks, Radhika. A very, very warm welcome to David Blatner. We are very happy to have you here at Typo Day. David has a great experience working with the desktop industry. Okay, so he's the co-founder of the Creative Pro Network, co-host of Indesign Secrets and Creative Pro Week, and the publisher of Indesign magazine, which is an extremely popular magazine. David is the author and co-author of 15 books, including Real World Indesign, The Joy of Pi, The Spectrums, Our Mind-Boggling Universe, From Infinitesimal to the Infinity. He's also the author of Indesign Essential Training and Advanced InDesign training titles like LinkedIn Learning. David has spoken at conferences and workshops on 5 continents and has been awarded the Adobe Max Master twice. Very warm welcome to David. David, you can go ahead. And thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me at the event. This is really very special indeed. It's very early here on the West Coast, and it's late there for some of you. So I so appreciate you sticking around after a long day of excellent presentations to hear a few words from a very different perspective, perhaps, because I am the least likely person to be on your agenda. I think that, for example, I don't have, like some people here, a higher education degree in design or typography or art. I'm not really a designer. I'm not really a typographer. My story is that I learned at a very young age to love everything about type. And then I was simply in the right place at the right time in history. And I've got a curious temperament. That is, I love learning new things. And the result of all of that is that I've been working with type, and specifically digital type, for 45 years. And that's perhaps surprising because for most people, digital type didn't really even exist until about 35 years ago. So what happened? Now, the organizers, Ravi and the organizers of Typography Day asked me to talk about my history with digital type, but then they also added a challenge. If possible, they said, please try to include this year's theme, which is hope. And I thought, hope, that's interesting. Is that a new font? Maybe hope oblique, hope condensed, hope, variable font hope? No, just hope. And I thought, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to first say a few things about hope, and then I'm going to go on to talk a little bit about my history and about my life with type. And hopefully these parts will find some way to intersect. I don't know if they will, I don't know when, but somehow I'm going to talk about hope and my history with digital type, and I will then have fulfilled my duty and all will be well. Okay, part 1, hope. Hope springs eternal, as they say, but what the heck is hope? This is important. Hope is closely related to faith, but it's different. It's not faith. Faith is the belief that something will happen. Now, hope is the belief that something can happen. In my opinion, hope is even more important than faith. There is something truly important about faith, but even more important with hope. You can live without faith, but you cannot live without hope. You know, if you want to truly destroy someone or destroy a society or destroy a country, you'll take away their hope. In the same way, abandoning our own hope is ultimately the worst mistake we can make. Rabbi Nachman of Breslov once said, the greatest sin of all is the sin of despair, because despair is giving up on hope. Now, I also want to be clear that hope is different than want. We all want things. Want is like hunger. Want is like grasping. Want is not hope. You know, many of the greatest teachers in history have shared this lesson with us. You need to separate faith from hope and want from hope. And my favorite line, many of you know this better than I, from Bhagavad Gita, is do not get attached to the fruits of your labor. You may want it, but you have to let it go. Have to let it go. And what is left when you let go of the hunger of want? Hope. Hope is left. No. So if hope is not faith and hope is not want, then what is it? Hope is the foundation of design. Now, not just graphic design, but all design, which sounds crazy, I know, but hear me out. Hear me out. Design is about intentional communication. You know, we choose a font, for example, because we want the text to communicate a voice. We choose letter spacing and word spacing and column width because we want to communicate more efficiently. We choose color and paper and images and all the other tools that at our disposal because we want to communicate feeling. And we choose intentionally to communicate. This is key. We choose intentionally to communicate. And we choose to communicate intentionally for the very same reason that we choose to go to school, or we choose to marry, or we choose to have children. We choose because we hope. Hope is what drives everything forward, everything. Hope that your intentional design, through design, you can make the world even just a little bit better. That is what it's all about, making the world just a little bit better. Now, I run a company called Creative Pro Network, and Creative Pro Network's purpose, the reason we exist, is to help people and organizations thrive by design. Because the practice of design is the practice of hope. Okay, so why do I think this way? What led me to these totally wild conclusions? For that, we're going to have to jump to part 2, history, my history. Where did all this come from? Well, while English was my first alphabet as a small child, this or something like this was my second or third or fifth alphabet. You see, my father, when I was very young, loved alphabets, glyph sets, languages. And he tells the story about when he was a young man going to the Sequoia National Park in California. And I don't know if you know about sequoias. Sequoias are some of the largest trees in the world, huge, huge trees. And at the Sequoia National Park, he went to the museum and learned about where the name Sequoia came from. And Sequoia was probably named after a man named Sequoia, who was of the Native American, the indigenous American tribe, the Cherokee tribe. And Sequoia invented an alphabet for the Cherokee people. The Cherokee people had no glyph set. They had no written language. They had a language, but not a written language. And Sequoia invented one. And my father learned about this and it was like, what? You can invent your own languages? Why did no one ever tell me this? You can just make your own languages. And so he spent decades drawing languages. It was like his way of doodling. He would just write little kind of crazy alphabets. Some were phonetic, sometimes they were ideographs. But underlying all of this, and what he always taught me was, this means something. This means something. I might even not know what, but it means something, and that's important. You know, it reminds me of that wonderful scene in the movie Close Encounters of a Third Kind. Remember that? When Richard Dreyfuss is making a mountain, and he doesn't know why, but he's making this shape, and he says, this means something. I love that. The idea that this means something, because this underlying fundamental idea that my father taught me was that symbols carry meaning. And when you combine those symbols, you create even more interesting meanings. And when you combine those combinations into even more complex ways, you create greater complexity and sometimes unintended consequences, what we call emergent phenomena. For example, like in a different example, if you take two screens and you cross them over, you know how you get those moire patterns, the moire patterns that aren't really there, but they are there. You know, there's emergent phenomenon that comes out when you combine these symbol sets. So when I was a little kid, my dad was planting this seed of an idea into my head that letter forms, glyphs, have meaning, and they can combine into words and sentences and paragraphs that have meaning. And then something happened that took it to a whole new level for me. My parents got divorced. It's okay. It's all right. They got divorced and then they remarried. My father married a woman. My stepmother was a graphic designer. And my stepmother wanted to get to know me better. And her way of getting to know me, because she was a designer, was to introduce me to her world, to her work, to graphic design. And so she introduced me to Letraset and X-Acto blades and format cutouts and waxers and all the stuff that she used in her work in the 1970s. She said, hey, let's play with this. And that was critical to my understanding, because I suddenly started thinking, wait a minute, you can not just draw your own alphabets or draw the English alphabet, but you can actually assign design to them. You can put them on a curve, or you can put them in all kinds of crazy ways, and you can change the font. I learned something called a font, and that there were different fonts. This was mind-blowing as a kid. So my stepmother introduced me to this whole world of graphic design, and it changed everything for me, changed everything. Then my mother remarried, and my stepfather happened to be a computer scientist. And he worked at a little place called SRI, Stanford Research Institute, and then he went on to Xerox PARC. And I don't know if you know about PARC, Palo Alto Research Center. And this is where I grew up. Xerox PARC, Xerox took some of the greatest minds in the world and they put them all together in this building in Palo Alto, California. And they said, go invent stuff. Just go see what happens. And they invented Ethernet. They invented the mouse. They invented the graphical user interface. You know, what we see today with Mac and Windows, the idea that it's not just text on the screen, but you can actually put pictures on a screen. You can change fonts. You can change the look of something. All of that graphical, Windows, all of the graphical user interface was basically invented at Xerox PARC. And I was a little kid and I would jump on my bicycle after school and I would bike over to Xerox PARC to where my stepdad worked. and I would just wander around the halls, and I would find an office that was empty, and I would sit down at one of these computers. It's called the Xerox Alto, and the Xerox Alto was the computer that they invented to put all of this stuff together, networking and graphical user interface. Those white discs are floppy disks, not very floppy, but those are disks. Those are like 1 megabyte each, and they would go into this enormous machine. And you can see that there was a mouse, there was a screen, there was a graphical user interface that I could draw on, and I could even change the font. I could type and change the font. And here's where it got crazy. I could print to laser printers, because Xerox was in the laser copier business, and they said, well, if we can copy, then we can print to it. And they turned their laser copiers into laser printers, which were like as big as a desk, sometimes almost as big as a room. And I could print from this crazy device onto a laser printer. And I started writing my school papers. I started going to, I'd go after school, I'd go over to Park, and I would type up my school papers, and I'd print them out. And I would use Times and Helvetica, because that's pretty much all I could use at the time. Times and Helvetica. I'd print out my school papers, and then the next day I would go and I would turn them in. And it was very funny, because this is like 7th grade. I'm like 13 years old, and my teachers would look at this stuff that I would turn in, and they wouldn't write on it, because they told me that it was professionally typeset. Because I don't know how you got your papers professionally typeset, but they were very reluctant to write on the paper because it looked too clean. So that was very amusing. Much later, I look back at these papers. I still have some in my files, and I think this was such a funny thing for me to be doing as a child, to be professionally typesetting my papers. So few years went by, and I was about to go to college. And just before I went to college, my parents said, we want to help you buy a computer so that you can have a computer at college. This was kind of a brand new thing, personal computers at the time. And so we went and looked at the computer store, and I saw this thing called the Macintosh, the Apple Macintosh. This was 1984. The first Mac had just been released about 1 month before. And again, the right place at the right time for me to jump forward into the future. The Mac had a very, very similar graphical user interface to the old Xerox Alto computers. And that's a whole separate story why that happened with Steve Jobs. But I saw the Mac and I said, that's it. That's what I'm used to. That's what I grew up with as a child. That's what I want to use. So we got a Mac. I took it to school. The Mac was very exciting. We had lots of fonts we could use. It was, the fonts were all bitmapped, no outlines yet, all bitmapped fonts. And I grew to love these fonts. And I did some really interesting design work with these in the early days. Then, just jumping forward a little bit, then in 1984, that was 84, 86, I believe, the Apple released the laser writer. So they took this giant laser printers and they put it into this little box, and all of a sudden you could go down to a store, and for 50 cents a print, you could print out your own laser prints. And there were much more interesting fonts, all kinds of fun fonts we could use. And they were so clean. Again, it was like back to my old days at Xerox. 10 years later, this was 10 years after I was doing all of this at Xerox PARC, all of a sudden people are using PageMaker. Well, I have to learn PageMaker, because PageMaker taught us that you don't have to just write like in Word, vertical text, or just a story. We could actually lay out the page. And all of a sudden with PageMaker, I was putting text here and changing font here and changing the size there. And I realized this is what I was doing 10 years ago with my stepmother. I'm now finally taking all the information I learned from my stepfather and all the information I learned from my stepmother, and I'm putting it together with PageMaker to build design. That was very exciting for me. Now, the fonts that I used back then became the fonts that were special to me, right? You know this idea that if you the music that you listen to between age 14 and 17 becomes the music that will always be special to you. Whatever it is, whatever generation you are, that's the music that you imprint on. For me, it was these fonts. These fonts were the fonts that I grew to love as around 14 to 17. And so whenever I look at them, I think, oh, that's like home. It's very funny. Fonts are like that, right? Now, I learned something else about fonts around that time, around 1987, 1989. I learned that fonts are like computer programs. And so I started learning PostScript, and I started learning about how to actually make fonts, and that was exciting. So I started building my own fonts at the time. And then around 1989, I called Adobe. Adobe was a little company down the street. I called Adobe, and they put me through to Sumner Stone, who was the head of type at Adobe at the time. And he said, hey, come on over. So I rode my bicycle down to Adobe, and he showed me around, and they were working on something. We talked about type, and he inspired me, and he showed me something amazing. Just at that time, they were working on some new technology called ATM, Adobe Type Manager. And ATM had this crazy idea of, don't just use bitmapped fonts on screen, actually take the font outlines that people were drawing and automatically rasterize them to the screen, which is just, everybody does that now. But in 1989, this was a crazy idea. But there was a problem. Their basic font, Courier, the typewriter font Courier, had been drawn not as outlines, but it had been drawn as a single stroke. Every character was a single stroke. And so it wouldn't work with ATM. And so he was showing me how they had to recreate Courier to be outlines so that it would work with ATM, which was, again, just this crazy time of life. So I was taking all of this in. I was learning about fonts and PageMaker. I then learned about Quark Express. In 1990, I wrote a book called the Quark Express book. The Quark Express book went on to become the biggest selling book on Quark Express in the world. And I traveled all over the world in the 90s talking about Quark Express. I was hired, because I knew Quark Express, I was hired by Microsoft to work on the original Microsoft TrueType developer specs. And funny story, they hired me because I knew Quark Express and I knew about layout, but and I knew about fonts. But then I got in there and they insisted I do the entire job with Microsoft Word. Like, yeah, we don't want to use Quark Express. We don't want to use any of that fancy stuff. We just has to be done in Word. So I threw away everything. I just had to use Word. At the time, I was also learning about letterpress and offset printing and metal and all kinds of other stuff. Because the book was a big success, the publisher started asking me to do more books. So I did a bunch of other books about other products, other things. I wrote about InDesign. Starting around 2002, I got really into InDesign. And so in 2004 or 5, I can't remember, I think it was 4, I started InDesign magazine. And it's a PDF magazine. It's still published today. And InDesign magazine was this great outlet because I could start teaching everything I knew, and I could start getting my friends to write up about InDesign. And we all started publishing stuff about InDesign. And the fun thing about publishing your own magazine or a website or newsletter or whatever is you get to write about and publish about the things that you love. And I found myself fascinated once again with these languages, right? With glyphs, with alphabets, and with the stories that my father would tell me, that these symbols mean something. Now, I don't always know what they mean, but they mean something, and that excites me. I love that. The app, this is important. The app, whether it's InDesign or anything, any app, gives us access to digital fonts, which gives us access to arranging these symbol sets. And we can make meaning and more complex meaning out of the symbol sets. And I love that. Now, remember what I said at the beginning. I said, I wanted to point out even more symbol sets. I just love these. And some of them are real languages and some of them are fake languages. The one in the middle there is Cherokee that that I was talking about earlier. But all these characters reflect an inner meaning. And that, like I said, that excites me. I enjoy just looking at them. As I said at the beginning, I'm not a designer, and I'm not a typographer. And yet, maybe I am. Maybe I am, because, you know, everyone is a designer. Everyone is a typographer. And not just because so many people have access to these tools now, right? But because literally, this is what we do as humans. As humans, we make intentional choices. We make the intentional choice to communicate. We're taking impulse, energy, emotion, ideas, and we're turning it into language. And then we turn that language into text, which are symbols, right? We're turning language into symbol sets. And then we take those symbol sets and we design them. We design the symbol sets and how they're laid out on the page. Why? To communicate even better. Why? Why do we spend all of this time taking language to turn to text and then text into design? Why do we spend all this time designing? Because we hope. We hope that through intentional design, we can make the world just a little bit better. That's what it's all about. We hope that through design, we can make the world just a little bit better. Thank you. That's all I have. Follow me. Enjoy the rest of the show. I'm looking forward to it. Let me stop sharing here.
Yeah, thanks, David, for such a wonderful talk. Okay, yeah, run through history. You know, I wish I was there with you to, you know, take a peek at the park. Yeah,
Yes.
It's such a great history, you know, in the making, and I think you took us through it really very nicely. And I think
Thank you.
Really kudos to you for make this connection between hope and design. And I think that's a great connection that you talked about.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's got all of us to think a lot about it, you know, and it's a good connection to tell students also, you know. Thanks so much for it. You know, we really enjoyed the talk. Okay, so I think there are a lot of comments. Okay, so one of the questions Gargi has is, can we make other people make the world a little bit better? That's the question mark. Yeah.
Can we make other people?
So I agreed with him actually that when he said that we make the world better through design.
Okay.
So either you make the world better a little bit through design, or you make other people, you influence them enough so that they make the world better a little bit through design. So that's what I meant.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that. I think it's very true that design in many ways is about manipulation. We don't like to think about that, but it is a form of manipulation because it's communication and we're trying to change somebody else because we're taking something that's within us and through design, putting it into them. At least that's the attempt, that's the hope.
Essentially, when we're talking about typography and graphic design, the whole point of it is usually communication of an idea or a content. So whenever we are talking about communication, you're actually hoping that you're going to communicate this information to somebody and somebody's going to do something with that information. They're going to take some sort of action with it. So it's basically that idea.
I believe that to be true. I don't know if it's always because we want them to take action. I talk about it. I wrote a paper on LinkedIn a couple of years ago about the idea of packets. I call them packets of information. We, each of us, have something inside of us, which I call a packet, that we want to hand off. It's a packet transfer to somebody else. And we use design to design those packets. And that could be a photograph. You know, maybe we see something and we're saying, oh, I want to communicate that. So we're collecting it, we're packaging it up, and we're trying to give it to somebody else so that they can experience the same thing.
So
but often, very often.
You're saying is packaging your perception about something to somebody else. So
I believe that is a big part, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. And oftentimes that is, I want the world to be better. I wish that we could change the environment. I wish that we could create more equality, whatever it is. And
Right.
design allows us to put that information out there to encourage people to change, for sure.
Yeah, so
Right.
David, there's Sarang who loves your InDesign magazines. Yeah, again, Tanvi says, wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your experience and hope. Daniel has this question. Was there Elvish somewhere in there? Yeah.
I'm sorry, was there? Oh, Elvish. There was.
Elvish.
There was, Daniel. There was a Elvish font. I couldn't help myself. That is one of my favorite, of course. Tolkien's a Tolkien font.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, again, Sauvik has, thank you for your presentation, David. It was amazing. Yeah, so thanks so much. Yeah, I think it's more people are really thrilled about your presentation. David, thanks so much on behalf of Typo Day. Yeah, it was
It is a
really
pleasure.
nice ending, though it's late here. It's not that
Yes.
late. You know, in India, we all sleep quite late. You know, in fact, most of us
Good.
eat our food after this. You know,
Well, I
normally.
love
Yeah.
I love what you've created. I love this whole idea that this is an international experience and that we have people from all the time zones coming together to talk about type and design and how this is important to the world and to bring a sense of hope. So thank you for making this happen.
So David, next time I hope it's on site, being here in one of the Typo days. Yeah, thanks.
I would love that.
Yeah,
I would love that. I was last
Yeah.
time I was in India was 1992. And I think things have changed a little bit since 19.
Sure.
I look forward to coming back. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, with that, we'll say bye to everybody.
On behalf of Typo Day, we sincerely thank Professor Ravi Puvaya for chairing this session and to the keynote speaker, David Blatner, for the presentation. We would also like to thank the participants. Here we conclude the Typo Day 1. And thank you all for joining, and see you all tomorrow at same time, 1 o'clock Indian Standard Time. And thank you so much.